Late at night on July 2nd, 2002, two planes collided in the sky over southern Germany. A Tu-154 Bashkirian Airlines passenger jet and a Boeing 757 DHL cargo aircraft. Both crews died in the accident. Victims included children, 52 children aged 8 to 16. Most of them were students of a school for gifted children in Ufa. They headed to Barcelona. The children were awarded with the trip for their successful studies and brilliant results shown at school Olympiads. The crash became the worst tragedy in the aviation history of the 21st century. The collision of the planes occurred in the sky over Germany. Thus, the investigation was conducted by the German Public Prosecution Office and the Federal Bureau of Aircraft Accidents Investigation. It took 2 years to determine the cause of the accident.
Two questions were of great importance for us. First, how such a dangerous approach of the two aircraft happened, and second, why the collision avoidance system failed to prevent the accident.
The board established the crash had been caused by a SkyGuide air traffic controller mistake, contradictions in the instructions of the International Civil Aviation Organization, and the operating rules of the collision avoidance system. It was also the incorrect behavior of the Tu-154 crew that contributed to the collision. Further investigation will prove invalidity of accusations towards the Russian pilots, and they will be exonerated from blame. However, the destiny of another Russian citizen, whose case will be adjusted in the court in the end of October 2005, is not clear yet. The catastrophe over Lake Constance, Bودينسي, deprived him of his family and faith in justice. Even the most superficial glance at the report of the board shows that the results of the investigation are extremely contradictory. If at the moment of the accident the pilots followed the controller's instructions, then the controller is to blame. If in a critical situation the pilots acted against the instructions from air traffic control, then it's the pilot's guilt and the controller has nothing to do with the accident. The weird fact would have been left unnoticed, if not for a dramatic event which took place in a small Swiss town of Kloten. On February 24, 2004, in the suburbs of Zurich, the town of Kloten, Peter Nielsen was foully murdered on the doorsteps of his own house. The murderer had stabbed him several times with a knife, which was later found near the crime scene. It was a souvenir knife which cost 54 Swiss francs. The victim's neighbor testified that several minutes before the accident, a stranger had asked her in poor German where Peter Nielsen lived. Without delay, a composite picture of the suspect was made. However, no witnesses of the crime were found. This was strange, because Kloten is a very small town, where houses are just several meters away from each other. Streets, access ways, and driveways are clearly seen out the windows of houses, and everybody's life flies before the eyes of the neighbors. The version of burglary was immediately rejected by the Swiss police. The criminal or criminals didn't touch anything in the house. Moreover, they didn't even try to get a hold of any personal possessions of the victim. So why should murderers kill an ordinary man, an inhabitant of a quiet Swiss village? The answer became clear when it had been established that Peter Nielsen was the air traffic controller whose incorrect commands resulted in the collision of the Russian Tu-154 and the DHL Boeing. The next day after the murder, police arrested a Russian citizen, Vitaly Kaloyev, on suspicion of the crime. According to the data of the Swiss investigation, the accused went to the Nielsen's house on the previous night. Not far from the crime scene, Kaloyev asked the neighbor where the controller lived, and she showed him his apartment. Kaloyev rang the bell. When the owner of the apartment went out, Kaloyev tried to talk to him, but in a while, the two men started arguing. Kaloyev took out the knife and slaughtered Nielsen. According to the Swiss law enforcement authorities, the motive of the crime could have been private revenge of the Russian man. Kaloyev lost all his family in the crash over Lake Constance, his wife and 2 children. Still, Kaloyev didn't admit his guilt in the controller's murder. According to the materials of the case, I knocked, named myself, and showed with emotion that I wanted to come in. He didn't let me in with a flaunting air. I didn't say anything in reply. Just took a picture of my dead children out of my pocket and handed it to him, asking him to have a look. Kaloyev doesn't remember what happened afterwards. During the examination, he said, "I don't remember what really happened, but when I see the evidence, I think that it was me who killed Mr. Nielsen." The Public Prosecution Office of Switzerland considered these words to be an official admission of guilt. However, some facts bring about more questions than answers. In Switzerland, local telephone directories indicate not only the name and address of a subscriber, but also his occupation. A person who is planning a murder does not need to attract extra attention and leave witnesses. Besides, having planned a crime, Kaloyev only takes an inconvenient folding pocket knife. During the argument with the controller, the Russian reaches to his pocket for the knife and unfolds it. During all this time, Nielsen does not even try to escape or take away the weapon. For some reason, he just stands in the doorway and waits for Vitaly to start killing him. In addition, no fingerprints of the Russian were found on the knife, which killed the controller. The police tried to explain this by the fact that rain had washed away all traces. After arrest, Kaloyev was taken to a mental hospital. The drugs which Vitaly was given, as well as their impact on his state of mind, are unknown. The types of medical and psychological work with the suspect in the murder of the Swiss air traffic controller are also kept in secret. During the whole period of Kaloyev's stay at the medical hospital, no independent examination was conducted to estimate his state and the method of treatment used. What happened to Kaloyev's memory? How much of his personality has been preserved after the years spent at the asylum? Even after many months of treatment, Kaloyev did not assume his responsibility for the controller Nielsen's death. According to the investigators, Vitaly Kaloyev wanted to get revenge for the death of his wife and 2 children. That's a serious motive. But why would Kaloyev procrastinate with revenge for almost a year and a half? The name of the controller was known immediately after the tragedy. For all this time, Skyguide tried to delay payments to the relatives of the victims for as long as possible, and to pay the least possible indemnifications. Parents of a perished child were to receive $37,500, grandparents $7,500. So fewer relatives, less payouts. A written waiver of any claims in the future was a compulsory condition. Who would benefit from the accusations of the Russian citizen in the murder of Nielsen? Maybe those who from the very beginning tried to shift all responsibility onto the Russian crew. During the first minutes after the crash, the representative of Skyguide accused the Russian pilots in the accident. The official representative of the European Commission, Giles Gontal, claimed that the Russian Tu-154 deviated from its corridor, thus violating the flight plan, and the Russian pilot did not react to the controller's command to descend because of his poor knowledge of English. Or maybe the reason was that the near-collision control system of the Russian plane was surely outdated.
We had even a better version than the one of the Boeing, as I can see now from the materials of the investigation. System failure. It was like that. One company, everything is put together. The system worked very well. So there are no complaints as to the equipment. The planes operated accurately on both sides. To say that the pilots did not have proper English skills is typical cliché in the attitude towards Russians. It's absolutely stupid to say so, as this crew for sure had great work experience, thank God. Thank goodness the controllers of this route, not the route, but the sector, confirmed in the foreign press that this was nonsense. It was absolutely not true that the Russian crew had not spoken English. We conducted negotiations with them, and we had no problems. They even spent more time in their airspace than in the Swiss one.
Still, the version of the Russian pilot's guilt had been the major lead in the accident investigation for a long time. But why did the Skyguide representative blame the Tu-154 crew with such confidence? Why did he try from the very first moments to set the investigation on the wrong track, which was beneficial for his company? The answer is quite evident. The party at fault shall pay indemnification to the victims for moral and physical damage. And that's an enormous sum. Payment of compensations could have threatened the very existence of Skyguide Air Traffic Control Company. Meanwhile, the investigation of the plane crash is coming to its logical end. The investigators, more and more inclined to the conclusion that the main responsibility for the tragedy shall be borne by the air traffic controller, Peter Nielsen. By all appearances, Skyguide will soon be brought to justice at court. It's also known that Nielsen is ready to answer the questions of the Public Prosecution Office if they start legal proceedings against him. But at this very moment, the controller is murdered. His death is so timely. Right after his death, Skyguide all of a sudden admits its guilt, but shifts responsibility to the murdered controller.
We assume responsibility and ask families of the victims to forgive us.
The errors in the organization of the working process, technical problems, and financial crisis of the company were announced very superficially. The official report hadn't been published yet. There's no court decision, but they already thrust all responsibility for the accident upon Nielsen, and thus the company management escapes all threats quite successfully. Nobody is fired. Nobody even bears administrative responsibility. Only Nielsen is to blame. But deceased Nielsen cannot answer for that. In order to see the details of the tragedy, we'll restore the whole scenario of the flight. On July 1st, 2002, a Boeing 757 cargo jet of DHL Shipping Company takes off from Bergamo, Italy. The plane flies along the following route: Bahrain, Bergamo, Brussels, Bahrain. In half an hour, Baskirian Airlines Tu-154 starts its way from Moscow. The plane is en route to Barcelona. 9:21 p.m. The Boeing enters the area of Skyguide control.
Before the plane shifts to another zone, the controller must hand it over to his or her colleague. It means that the controller contacts the pilot and tells him that from the moment he should call, let's say the controller of Skyguide in Zurich, the pilot must confirm the reception. After that, he shifts to another frequency and contacts the Skyguide controller.
The Boeing 757 greets the controller and asks for permission to ascend to an altitude of 36,000 feet. Soon the plane reaches the altitude, but the controller is not informed about it. The flight is supervised by Peter Nielsen. he had good service record at work, although the list of penalties for May 2001 contains a remark. The controller violated separation rules. A dangerous, near collision of two planes occurred through Nielsen's fault, and they nearly crashed. The company management had a 30-minute talk with the controller. The subject of the talk is unknown since no one kept the minutes. His personal file does not contain any information about the topic of the discussion. Nielsen's actions were regarded as an accident against the background of his impeccable work reputation. But in a year, the same mistake will result in the death of 71 people. Nielsen receives a report from the Tu-154 that the aircraft enters his control area at the same altitude, 36,000 feet.
Two planes were flying from different directions. One of them came from the east, another one from the south. They were at the same altitude. It is exactly the task of the controller to timely arrange planes so that they fly past one another at different altitudes. It didn't happen. They stayed at one and the same altitude. The most important thing for us is to find the answer why it happened. Why weren't they separated to different altitudes?
The distance between the boards was about 188 kilometers. It isn't a long way by aviation standards. Still, the controller leaves the Tu-154 at its altitude and turns to Aero Lloyd Airbus, which at that moment is landing at the airport of Friedrichshafen, Germany. Nielsen performs double workload. He controls airflows and guides the aircraft to landing. But it shouldn't be like that. There are two different tasks. They should be performed by two persons instead of one. Nevertheless, it's a usual practice for Skyguide. The working schedule of the company is developed in such a way that every controller works 2 night shifts in a row. The one who finishes his or her second night shift goes to bed. The intensity of traffic is supposed to decrease at this time, so one person allegedly can handle its supervision. Skyguide believed in it until July 2, 2002. The company management knew about the violations but turned a blind eye to this fact.
He was alone in the hall and had to move from one workstation to another. As communication with the conflicting boards of the Tu-154 and Boeing 757 was conducted on the same frequency, and besides, he was guiding the landing of another aircraft in Friedrichshafen. He was using another frequency. He had to handle 2 workstations at a time, which is extremely inconvenient.
When Nielsen talks to the Boeing and the Tupolev, he does not hear the Airbus. While talking to Aero Lloyd, he cannot hear the Boeing and the Tupolev. Nielsen realizes that he can't cope with the situation and tries to shift the Airbus onto the German controller at the airfield. But there is no connection with the German controller.
He tried to shift the landing guidance in Friedrichshafen to another controller, but couldn't reach him and had to guide the aircraft on his own.
Meanwhile, the Russian crew detects a collision alert on the system display. The Boeing 757 is coming from the opposite direction. It is to the left of the Tupolev at the angle of 45 degrees. The navigator immediately estimates the altitude of the conflicting aircraft. The Traffic Collision Avoidance System, TCAS, shows that both planes are at the same altitude. The distance is dramatically decreased. The situation is about to become critical. The Collision Avoidance System produces a traffic command, which means that the conflicting aircraft is dangerously close. At the same moment, Nielsen notices that 2 spots on the display are moving towards each other and gives the Tu-154 an instruction to descend. But simultaneously with the controller's command, the collision avoidance system instructs to climb, which is to ascend. The situation is weird. The controller guides the Russian airliner to descend almost on top of the oncoming plane. Besides, commands from air traffic control severely violate the generally accepted flight regulations.
Actually, we asked ourselves this same question. Why didn't the pilots react to the TCAS warning? And we established that in the regulations, which are basically applied everywhere, in all manuals, these instructions were not formulated clearly enough.
So why did the controller decide to descend the Russian plane? Most likely, the reason is common discrimination of the Russian aviation in general. Every Russian aircraft in the European sky is deemed as a competitor. Just remember the story when our planes were prohibited to perform flights because of allegedly too noisy engines. Thus, according to an unspoken rule, European controllers always descend Russian planes. Change of altitude means loss in speed. The flight gets out of schedule, thus money is lost. In this context, a Boeing from Bahrain will always get a priority over a Russian airliner. In the meanwhile, the Boeing collision avoidance system gives a command to descend. The aircraft commander switches off the autopilot and starts descending, without reporting to the controller about executing the command. The distance between the Boeing and the Tupolev is dramatically decreasing. 29 seconds before the collision, Nielsen demands the Russian crew to speed up the descent. The aircraft commander presses the hand wheel. The speed of the descent increases. A few kilometers now separate the conflicting planes. At the same time, the collision avoidance system gives a new command to increase the speed of the climb.
Increase climb. Increase climb.
Meanwhile, Peter Nielsen turns to the display on the right and switches to the frequency of the German plane. When at last the Boeing reports that it is descending in accordance with the instruction of the TCAS, the controller does not hear it. He is busy with a complicated landing of the Airbus. 2 seconds before the catastrophe, the commander of the Tu-154 pulls the hand wheel and starts the engine at full throttle, ultimately to the top. The commander of the Boeing presses it down as much as possible. They are still trying to avoid collision. They are still fighting for their lives, but all in vain. The Bashkirian airline Tu-154 drives into the oncoming plane in the sky. The Boeing literally cuts the fuselage of the Russian plane in half with its tail fin. The fractions of the aircraft and the remains of human bodies fell down to earth, scattered for 35 square kilometers.
I was sitting on the balcony of my house with my wife. It was a marvelous evening, the first day of the month. Suddenly I received a call from Uberlingen, from the local police, and they told me that a plane had crashed in the area. I didn't realize the scale of the catastrophe then.
The Boeing and the Tupolev have collided, but Nielsen doesn't know it yet. He keeps landing the Airbus. It takes a few seconds for the controller to notice that the Russian plane has not gone on air for long.
2937.
I looked further and saw a huge flame. A man found a boy on the ground. We hoped that somebody might still be alive. He raised the boy slightly, turned him around. We could clearly see that the boy was dressed in jeans and a checkered t-shirt, but they were all dead.
The Judicial Commission starts the investigation. The bodies of the crew members were examined by the experts of the Medical Legal Institute. No alcohol, medicine, or drugs were found in the remains. The commission starts searching for the ones to blame. The Federal Bureau of Aircraft Accidents Investigation named actions of the Tu-154 crew as one of the causes of the crash. The Russian pilots had to execute the command of the TCAS and ignore the controller's instructions. The system manually directly stipulates any maneuvers contrary to the TCAS commands are strictly prohibited. Still, the Flight Operations Manual describes the TCAS as auxiliary equipment. It should only assist pilots in safe aircraft operation. Nevertheless, all responsibility is still placed on the pilots and the controller.
As for the moment of the accident, none of the documents contained instructions for the crew on how to deal with critical situations in case of mutual exclusive commands. They didn't exist.
The Aircraft Accidents Investigation Board considers the Swiss controller to be the one responsible for the tragedy. It was Nielsen who violated the separation regulations. So what kind of punishment was administered to the controller? None. He is not dismissed or suspended from work. His license is just suspended and he is transferred to the central office of Skyguide. He receives psychological treatment. He is protected and prepared to transfer to the office in Geneva. The head of Skyguide, Alan Rosier, explains his actions as follows. We did not fire Nielsen. Thereby, we assume our responsibility for his actions and the fact that Nielsen is ready to bear his part of such responsibility. Until a person's guilt is proved by the court, he cannot be dismissed. Nielsen should have stayed within reach of the investigators. Had we fired him, he would be able to escape somewhere. It might seem that in such a strange way, Skyguide is trying to protect their employee. But maybe all this care for Peter Nielsen is just a reward for his silence. Let's consider another version of the controller's murder. Immediately after the accident, Nielsen is shadowed. Skyguard Security Service guards him against any unnecessary contacts and annoying media, as well as against the relatives of the victims. The controller's silence can be bought. Still, it's expensive and cannot give any guarantees. But suddenly, Vitaly Kaloyev arrives in Switzerland. What secrets could die with the controller? Let's come back to the official version of the crash. There are a few factors that do not fit in the general picture of the accident. Modern electronics gives men numerous signals in order to prevent collisions. Why did Peter Nielsen ignore all these warnings? The thing is that there were no warnings. Preventative maintenance of the equipment was scheduled for the night of July 2nd at the air traffic control station of Skyguide. And the Swiss didn't even consider informing related regional ATC centers about the scheduled works.
At the time of the collision, visual alert system was turned off. Only the acoustic alert was on. But Nielsen could not hear the acoustic alert because he was busy switching from one workstation to another and guiding the plane to landing in Friedrichshafen.
At 9:23 p.m., the workers turned off the system of direct telephone connection with related ATC stations in Karlsruhe and Munich. The backup line, that is an ordinary urban telephone network, appeared defective as well.
There's a rule in flight, following to have several safety networks, not only one. If one of them disrupts, it won't be a problem, as the others will provide the required support. But in this case, all networks happen to be down. The controller didn't have any phone connection. He tried calling Friedrichshafen and was too busy to adequately control the flight of these two aircraft.
In fact, Nielsen was left without any means of communication, without the necessary kit of technical instruments, without the assistance of his partner, who was resting in another room. Collision of the planes was inevitable. So what does the Regional Air Traffic Control Center in Zurich Skyguide represent? Are they really a Skyguide?
It is the only company which is 99% owned by Switzerland, but is independent from the state. Only 0.1% belongs to the employees and other companies. The company does not receive any funds from the state of Switzerland. The company operates as if it were a private company and is financially independent from Switzerland.
Skyguide Articles of Association declared that the company was incorporated with the aim to provide security of flights, not for gaining profits. A year and a half after its incorporation, the company management announced upcoming bankruptcy. Technical control equipment was hopelessly outdated, and the company did not even have enough assets to pay salary to its employees. Had the passengers known about the real state of affairs at the Air Traffic Control Center in Zurich, in the heart of prosperous and thriving Europe, they would have switched to trains. In 2000, 47 severe air traffic incidents were registered in the area of Skyguide control. The pilots call such events near collisions. A year before the tragedy, in 2001, 51 such incidents were registered. The version, according to which Nielsen was the one to blame, could be very favorable for Skyguide management. And not only for the management. However, there is one more hypothesis as to who could benefit from the official version. Let's come back to the beginning of July 2002. The European media, at the suggestion of Skyguide, is actively discussing the guilt of the Russian pilots. And suddenly, a sensational interview with an expert of the Federal Aviation Administration, Heiko Tegan, appears in the German newspaper called Russian Berlin. There, he said that the tragedy on Lake Constance is the responsibility of Germany, namely air traffic controllers of DFS, a German company from Munich. Soon after the scandalous interview, he died after mysterious circumstances. What did Tegan mean by blaming the Munich controller? Five and a half minutes before the collision, the German controller handed the Tu-154 over to the Swiss controller, Nielsen, and after that switched his radar to another frequency and forgot all about the plane. At first, it all seems fine, but there's one little thing, which turns the situation upside down. The Russian plane was flying at the altitude of 36,000 feet, and the Boeing from Bahrain had lifted to the same altitude by that time. The controller from Munich created a critical situation in the sky. He could not have failed to notice the approach of the two boards. Despite, the DFS controller didn't even try to inform neither the Russian crew nor his colleague Nielsen about the danger. The International Civil Aviation Organization, ICAO, requires that the controllers separate planes 9 to 10 minutes before the probable collision. This leads to only one conclusion. It was the German controller who created the critical situation in the air. Thus, German controllers should share responsibility for the collision with Skyguide. And this should not only be a moral responsibility, but a financial one as well. The German Commission of the Aircraft Accidents Investigation Bureau chose not to emphasize the action of their countrymen. According to the official version, which satisfies both DFS and Skyguide as well as the Aircraft Accidents Investigation Bureau, Peter Nielsen is the one to blame. But why didn't the Munich controller warn his colleague from Zurich? Let's try to figure it out. Sure, it is just a version, even though based on real facts. Airlines pay fees for every aircraft flying in the control area of a particular air traffic control company. German Air Traffic Control Company, DFS, is the fifth in the cost of their services. Skyguide, which controls a small area, is the third in prices. The cost of a flight in its control area makes up to 1,500 euros. 3,000 planes fly over Switzerland every day. If we multiply these two figures, we'll see that it's the matter of multi-million dollars in profits.
The cost of the flight depends on two criteria: the size of the plane and the flight distance. Therefore, I can't give you the exact amount. Big planes cost more. For example, a flight from the north to the south of Germany or from Munich to Hamburg will cost an A300 Airbus about 1,100 euros.
Für die Anflugsicherungsgebühr.
30 years ago, the sector of the sky over southern Germany was transferred to Swiss controllers without indemnity. Zurich Airport is located too close to the borders of Germany. That's why the decision was made that the Swiss would take control over the approaches to their airport. Since then, aircraft flying over this sector pays fees to Swiss, not German controllers. Though technical capacities of Munich company DFS allow controlling airflows in the sector, basically Germans lose possible profits every day.
There are quite a few international air traffic control centers around Switzerland: Frankfurt, Milan, Lyon, Zurich, and Geneva. So if a plane flies from the south and plans to land in Frankfurt, it should actually start descending over Switzerland. Actually, this is the reason why Switzerland needs to cooperate with its neighbors.
Germany has declared its wish to independently control the sky over its territory and receive considerable dividends for this job a long time ago. In this context, every mistake of Swiss controllers is for the benefit of Germans. Since 1999, at the initiative of the European Commission, the Single European Sky Program has been implemented in Europe. According to the plan of European officials, the Unified Air Traffic Management System is being developed. All national air traffic control services are united into a single European system. DFS, Air Traffic Control Company from Germany, manages about 8,000 planes a day. So, almost every fourth European aircraft flies over its control area. Germans do not conceal that they would like to become a basis for the new system.
We are one of the leading companies in Europe in terms of efficiency and safety. As for pricing, we are rather expensive. We'll have to keep working on reducing the prices a bit. If we manage this, we'll get a very important sector.
The tragedy over Lake Constance happened at the time when Germany and Switzerland rather harshly discussed an agreement to air boundaries transfer. The German company could benefit from the situation when its responsible competitors showed their lack of professionalism. The human tragedy became another argument in their contention for the piece of sky. However, even the death of 71 people hasn't caused any significant impact on the state of affairs in European civil aviation. Skyguide controllers keep managing the airspace in Central Europe. Over 3 years that passed after the catastrophe, all those who could challenge the official version passed away. The editor-in-chief of the German magazine, Pilot and Aircraft, Heiko Tegan, died of a heart attack. Peter Nielsen, the controller, was murdered under mysterious circumstances. However, there is one more witness, Peter Nielsen's assistant. He disappeared right after the accident. According to the unofficial sources, he was immediately pensioned off with a money allowance exceeding his salary. We can just hope that this person will still appear at court. Now the relatives of the victims are attacked by German lawyers. Only in July 2002, the representatives of 18 law firms visited Ufa. They scared the families with a warning that the terms for submission of claims was about to expire. They all agreed to work for 1/3 of the compensation. Some of them managed to conclude agreements with the relatives. Soon it turned out that for some reason, some of the lawyers filed claims in the USA against manufacturers of collision avoidance systems. Others try to persuade poor relatives to accept new proposals from Skyguide and receive $150,000 for each child. After that, having pocketed their legitimate $50,000 per client, these lawyers forgot all about the scandalous proceedings. Every year on the night of July 3rd, the memory of the victims of the worst plane crash of the 21st century is honored in southern Germany. 3 years ago, right from the sky, children fell down to the earth. In this unusually picturesque place in the heart of Europe, in the suburbs of the town of Oberlingen, a small grove, a field of wheat. It's cozy and silent there. Right before her departure to Spain, Zoya Fedotova, 13 years old, wrote in a letter to her friend, "I heartily hope that when we are both old, and this is not going to happen soon, we'll sit together at home, at my place or yours, and drink tea, and you'll say, 'Tell me a story.'" After the girl died, her diary was found with the following verse in Russian.
I want to fly like a bird, but I can't. It might be just a dream to come true. I can fall down, slip out of the cloud with my foot. Still, I prefer to fly for one moment than being blind for all my life. I fell down from the moon, from its sharp edge, and was flying for a long time and reached heaven.